This lesson discusses some of the key aspects of the strategy of war that was used not just by the British but also by the colonists, and sort of how that evolved over the course of the conflict. As you know, or you may not be aware if you haven't had a chance to listen to the other lesson about some of the challenges that the colonists face, they were at a significant disadvantage. Any outsider looking in would have seen that they had less supplies, less organization, less experience, and certainly just were not in any form of regimented organization prepared to fight on a big scale. However, they were still able to achieve success, and some of that was due to strategy of war, and some of that was due to who else got involved in the conflict at the time. The strategy of war in the American Revolution refers to the tactics and ways of fighting employed by the parties to the conflict. Understanding the methods for fighting and the weapons used in the process of fighting the American Revolution is one way to study the strategy of war. Now, why is this important? The fact that soldiers in the colonies had so few resources and no formal training or experience to fight a war makes it all the more interesting to see how they were successful despite the challenges that were in front of them. While there were a number of factors that contributed towards American victory in the colonies, it's important to be able to understand how those different pieces worked together and eventually contributed to success, because all of them in some way played a role. Let's start by thinking about Great Britain's strategy. In 1778, the Royal Army out of Great Britain had 50,000 of their own troops cooperating with over 30,000 German mercenaries. In this same year, which was about a year to a year and a half into the conflict, George Washington had 20,000 troops under his control. And at any given time during the war, George Washington never had more than 20,000 troops under his command at any given time. So simply comparing the numbers of soldiers that they had access to, Great Britain just far outnumbered them on that front. The majority of the soldiers fighting for the colonies were unskilled, they were poor, they were without land, and they were young. Others were slaves or indentured servants who were substituting for their masters in return for freedom at the end of the war. And also involved in the war effort on the colonial side were the women and children who contributed in the form of supplies, clothing, and food, in addition to providing nursing skills. Even though this form of medicine and nursing wasn't necessarily systematic throughout the colonial army, it was sort of an ad hoc. As people had skills they could contribute, they did. One of the things that was beneficial for the colonists at the outset of the American Revolution was the fact that conquering the colonies geographically was going to be very challenging, despite the size of Great Britain's army and navy. It became nearly impossible for British forces to occupy the vast countryside, and that was just the 13 colonies at the time. As a result of their inability to control this area, patriots who were loyal to the British Crown were frequently captured and tortured by those involved in the rebellion. So the only people that Great Britain had supporting their cause in the colonies were those who were very outspoken and were very likely to be captured by the colonists who were fighting so hard for independence. So the British Army was not able to control the size geographically, and they also couldn't control the fact that the colonists were sort of seeking these patriots out and trying to do away with them as quickly as possible. Any support that came from individuals living in the colonies was quickly diminished by the colonists' ability to control their geographical areas better. And one of the biggest failures of British soldiers was not taking advantage of loyalist support better. So what happened to many of those who were supporting the British cause was simply that their voices were either greatly diminished or they were killed by the colonists. The colonial strategy, on the other hand, is very interesting because most of the colonists did not have specific training on military warfare, but many of them had learned guerrilla tactics as a result of their interactions with Native Americans. As a result, many struck quickly, hiding behind fences and trees, and then just quickly disappeared. Since the American colonists generally didn't wear a uniform, it was very difficult to distinguish who was supportive to the crown and who was supportive of the rebellion. The British may have been able to achieve more success if they'd been able to deliver a strategy known as a knockout blow. But George Washington knew how much his army was outnumbered at any given time, and he was conscious of avoiding confrontations of a large scale. So he never gave the British the opportunity to deliver a major blow that could have been a real key for the British succeeding in this conflict. Only at one time during the entire Revolution did American forces surrender to the British, and that was in Charleston in the year 1780. Another strategy that was essential to the success of the colonists but had very little to do with warfare tactics was the rise of popular participation and knowledge of the time. Thousands of ordinary individuals came forward to put themselves in the line of fire because of their belief in and their popular support for the revolution. Without this commitment, it would have been really difficult to overcome the British forces. And even though it might not have specifically been a part of the colonial strategy, one of the things that was key for their success didn't have to do with their own fighting. Spain, France, and the Netherlands also became involved in the conflict, and the British, who did not want to lose their valuable trading colonies in the West Indies, couldn't focus all of their military effort in the American colonies. So there were a variety of things that challenged both the colonists and the British at the outset of the conflict, but how it really unfolded was simply that the colonists seemed to have a better handle on their geographical area. They could root out and get rid of or forcefully punish those who were supportive. And George Washington was very conscious of not allowing the British to deliver that knockout blow that could have really given them the momentum to move forward and succeed in the war. So all of these strategies combined with the assistance they got from outside countries is important.